series that we started last week based on the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And it's a thought that the Lord placed in my heart, not only because of what we see in the culture today, but also because it lines up so well with what God is speaking to Israel through the book of Devarim. We must understand that on the one hand, we do see that God spoke through Moses to that generation of Israel that was about to enter the land. But make no mistake, the Spirit of God uses the weekly readings so that this is what God is saying to the world today. And so this is what the Lord is speaking to our world, to our culture, to our nation, to our society, and to the entire world today. And so I've been wanting to do this for a while, and when I saw the opportunity, I knew, okay, this is the time to do this. To take the 10 Commandments, and unfortunately, we only have time, I will probably need 10 hours to go through the 10 Commandments. And we only have about 45 minutes, right? If I'm abusive, then I'll take a whole hour, but I don't like doing that. Because basically, I need to go and have lunch too, so. But I want to take just the first commandment. And I want to do a couple of things here, 2 or 3 things, because I want to begin with a passage while you make your way to Deuteronomy chapter 5 for us to read the version that we find in Deuteronomy 5, very close, very similar to what we find in Exodus, right? So while you make your way and put a finger right there on Deuteronomy 5, we're going to be in a lot of places today. We're going to begin actually in 2 Chronicles 28. 2 Chronicles 28. Because I want to first illustrate, so we're going to see first an illustration of the first commandment, then an exposition of the first commandment. I'm going to explain the first commandment in ways that probably you haven't heard yet. And then we're going to see the ministry of the 10 Commandments. We're going to end in Psalm 119, where we have 9 statements about the 10 Commandments that are just amazing in what they're supposed to do, what they are intended to do in us and for us. So we're going to begin with an illustration of the 10 Commandments, actually the first commandment in our case, an illustration of the first commandment in 2 Chronicles chapter 28. So chapter 28 of 2 Chronicles is the story of King Ahaz, the chronicles of his kingship, and some of the things that the Lord led the author of this book to write for our instruction and our teaching. So we're going to begin in verse 1. We're going to jump a little bit and then pick it up later on down in the story. So 2 Chronicles 28 verse 1, it says, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. So he was a millennial, wasn't he? Anyway, so he was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do right in the sight of the Lord as David his father had done. Verse 2. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. That's not a good compliment. There wasn't a single good king in Israel. Not one. So he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He also made molten images for the Baals. He made molten images. Molten images, molten come from melting. And what it was is they would carve idols in wood and then cover it with metal. So the melted metal, then it will come and do a plated, so to speak, on the wood. We have some of that in the tabernacle. Most of the furnishings in the tabernacle were first made out of wood and then covered with gold. They were not used for idolatry, though. So this is different here. So he also made molten images of the Baals. Notice that it is plural. Because it's the same deity that's manifested in different locales. So very much in the ancient Near East, gods were confined to your location. So the god of, when we see the story of Balak and Balaam, he needs to go to wherever whatever nation he was supposed to curse or do his work on, and plead with the local god of these people in this location. So they believed very much that it was kind of confined to a specific place. And we're going to see a little bit in a moment why that was. And so Ahaz worshipped the Baals, the versions of Baal, appearing in different locations. Verse 3 then, moreover, he burned incense in the valley. And as I'm reading this, I'm trying to read what's not said in between the lines. Because it says he burnt incense in the place, but it doesn't say who did he burn incense to. He burned incense to the Baals, but notice that it says that in the valley of Ben Hinnom, and he burned his sons in fire. Now we know we're in the presence of Molech. The sacrifices, the human sacrifices, the children's sacrifices that were made in this valley, right outside of the city gates of Jerusalem, they were made to this idol, Molech. So this guy got around really worshiping anything and everything. But he burned his sons in fire, plural, more than one. Rightly so, we make a connection with abortion in our culture today. And the Lord calls this an abomination, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel. That's the Canaanites. And the word here, abomination, is the same word used for the commandments regarding diet that the Lord gave Israel. So all of the animals of the sea, all of the animals of land, all of the rodents, the roaches, and all of those things, they are called an abomination. And the purpose was for Israel to develop a strong emotional rejection of those things, of those smaller things in the diet, so that when you were confronted with bigger things that were abomination, you will have that reaction will be natural to you. That naturally you will see that this is an abomination and experience the same emotional reaction and rejection of those things. We call this today morally shocking things. Things that shock even people who are not following any kind of strict moral life. These things are shocking. When we hear of doctors harvesting body parts of babies, that's beyond the pale. That's so morally shocking. And yet, we talk about injustice that has been embedded in our system. So people talk about systemic racism or systemic injustice. This is systemic injustice. It's embedded in our system, approved by our courts, tolerated by our Congress, executed by our executive branch. There is no will to exert this out of our culture and out of our systems. This is an abomination. To dedicate your children at the altar of any kind of a god and walk away like you just had a oral surgery. Verse 4. He sacrificed and burned incense. Again, it's going to tell us where he did it, but it doesn't tell us who he did it to. We got to keep that in mind, that he is sacrificing and burning incense to all these different gods of all these different places. And the word for sacrifice here in the Hebrew, it's actually the word used for the sacrifices for the peace offerings, for the sacrifices that you eat, so that it is split three ways. Some of the meat goes on the altar, offered to the god. Some of the meat is consumed by the officiating priest, and then some of the meat is used by the people, consumed, eaten by the people who bring the offering. So this meat then becomes a covenant meal. So Ahaz was joined to all of these gods by partaking of their sacrifices and eating along, hosting the whole thing himself. He sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. What is the meaning of that? You almost have to be in Israel and be in one of these high places. Some of those are today archaeological findings, and because we don't have the background of their idolatry, we have our own. So we're not sensitive to their idolatry. So we go to these places and it looks like, wow, this is awesome. Look at these rocks. Yeah, these are the stones that they erected in order to worship their gods. But I was in one of these high places, and the number one thing that you're going to notice in these high places is this: that if you try to make a cell phone call, it will be impossible to talk to anyone, because the wind will not allow them to hear you or you to hear them. The wind is strong. And that was one of the reasons why they sacrificed in the high places. You see, when you go to the high places, what you're going to find is that they built cities there, fortified. If you remember the story of Hanukkah, the story of how this band of weak men there were priests, they were not even soldiers, how they defeated the mighty Greeks, they rolled rocks, stones down the hill. So building your city in a high places up in the hill country, this is a military strategic location. So you are thinking, number one, of the advantages that it has for you to safeguard your city. And number two, you're also thinking of this, that it actually is easier for agriculture. Now you may think, wouldn't it be easier to have your agriculture on the plain? Well, again, you are exposed to being attacked. So if you have your agriculture up on the hills, then not only you can defend it, but you can then collect all of your grain, take it up to the top of the mountain, and what you see near these cities is the places where they would what we would call them during the processing after you collect your harvest, which is they're going to throw it all on the floor, have their animals walk around with this piece of wood and metal underneath, and they're going to, this is what we call the threshing floor. So you take it through the process of threshing floor, and then you take your forks and you lift it up in the air, and that's where the wind comes into place. Because the wind, you would remember some of Yeshua's parables, the wind is going to blow the chaff and make a nice pile for you. If you were to do that by hand, it will be very, very hard. So you want to take advantage of the wind. That's another reason why you will build up on the hills. This then gives us the implied reasons why they will also worship on the high places. Because the primary reason for worship these idols in the ancient Near East was a kind of mutual manipulation, really. These are demons, obviously, that were receiving these sacrifices in this worship. So in a way, they were manipulating the people and keeping the people under bondage and in slavery. But in a very real way, the people were manipulating these gods, or so they thought, into blessing them with fruitfulness. That's the key to it all. That's what motivates the men and women in the ancient Near East. They've got to have fruitfulness. They can't go out and get a job and then go to Walmart and buy food. They have to work the land. They have to have some form of production from the land so they can then sell it and cash it in and then buy some of the other things or trade it in. And so fruitfulness was the number one thing in your thought. And you had to secure it. And you will go and manipulate these gods up on the hills because that's where your crops are. That's the land that you need to be blessed, to be fruitful. In the winds, you would pray that they will bring in clouds and rain along with them. The reason why Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, you will recall, the reason why he sold his property, moved to Moab, was because Moab, across the Dead Sea, did not need to depend on rain. They had rivers. They had water. But if you live up on the hills of Bethlehem, there are no rivers up on those hills. That's the one thing you don't have on the hills. On the hills, you have to have rain. And that was the reason why they manipulated these gods into blessing them with fertility through rain. And you will go up on the mountain and pray that these winds will bring clouds and rain with them. That's what this guy was doing. Let me show you a little bit. And if we jump down to verse 16. Because he's going to go and be defeated by Israel, the kingdom just to the north, right? At this time, there is Judah in the south, Israel in the north. So they are defeated by Israel. And this guy now needs military help. And so in verse 16 we read that at that time King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for help against Israel. Verse 17, for again the Edomites had come and attacked Judah and carried away captives. The Philistines also had invaded the cities of the lowlands and of the Negev of Judah and had taken Beth Shemesh, Aijalon, Gederot, and Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages. And they settled there. When we were in Israel, in the same trip that Charlotte and I were, we went up to Timnah. This is where Samson did some of his things. And then from Timnah, you can almost see Beth Shemesh, and you go down and you visit Beth Shemesh in the same day because they're right there. But Timnah is way up high, and they're all in the what is called the Shephelah, in the lowlands, the transition between the high mountains and the coast. So this guy calls for help against all his enemies. In verse 19, it says, "For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel. For he had brought about a lack of restraint in Judah, and was very unfaithful to the Lord." He had brought about a lack of restraint. This sounds like reading the newspaper today, right? Brought about a lack of restraint. What does that mean? Well, you will recall when Moses went up to receive the Ten Commandments that he lingered there for a while. And meanwhile, down here, they thought, well, we don't know what happened to him. So Aaron said, well, let's get organized. Let's form a committee here. Let's create some idol and tell the people, these are your gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the people began to party and orgy and all that stuff. Well, guess what? This word here, when it says that he brought about a lack of restraint, that same Hebrew word is used in Exodus. When the people felt like they were loose and they could celebrate and do things that they wouldn't have done. So this lack of restraint is very much connected to idolatry and connected to sexual immorality. I forgot to mention to you in the previous verses, when it talks about the abomination of the nations, part of what that implied of the what was going on up on the high places was also not only sacred prostitution that will go along with the rituals for fertility. You can make the connection there that they would make, but it was also a place of male sacred prostitution. So very much an abomination indeed, what was going on there. So back down to verse 19, and this king brought about a lack of restraint in Judah and was very unfaithful to the Lord. Verse 20. So he called for the king of Assyria, right, to come help. So Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against him and afflicted him instead of strengthening him. So it didn't work out for him. So in this case, this man wanted someone to bless him and strengthen him, and the Lord turned it around for affliction, to continue to show him his need to repent and return to the Lord. Verse 21, although Ahaz took a portion out of the house of the Lord and out of the palace of the king and of the princes, and gave it to the king of Assyria, it did not help him. It did not help him. So what would he do then? Well, verse 22 tells us what he did. It says, now in the time of his distress, the one placed on him by the king of Assyria, this same king Ahaz became yet more unfaithful to the Lord, for he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus. Damascus is the capital of Assyria. And it is today the capital of Syria too. Same place. For he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which had defeated him. And he said, because the gods of the kings of Aram, another word for Assyria, because the gods of the kings of Aram helped them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me too. This is why this is called harlotry. This man was selling himself to any god that will help him, any god that would really come out and do what he wanted them to do. This idolatry of his was very much about him. It was not about those gods. It was about himself. And we're going to get to that point right now. It says, verse 24, moreover, when Ahaz gathered together the utensils of the house of God, he cut the utensils of the house of God in pieces, and he closed the doors of the house of the Lord and made altars for himself in every corner of Jerusalem. He made altars for himself. This whole idolatry was about himself. In every city of Judah, he made high places to burn incense to other gods and provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. The God of his fathers. Let's go quickly now to Deuteronomy 5. The God of his father, he provoked him to anger. Deuteronomy 5, verse 6 says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So the first commandment in verse 7 says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. So Ahaz is a perfect illustration of breaking this commandment, of the opposite of this commandment. But it goes deeper than what we just read in translation. And I'll tell you in a moment. In the Hebrew of this verse that we just read, do not be you shall not, let me read it again. You shall not have other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have, that's the verb here, to have. In the Hebrew, though, the verb is the to be verb. What it says in the Hebrew is, Lo yiyeh lecha Elohim aharim al panaya. Lo yiyeh, do not become. Don't be. Don't become. And in the version here that we have in the English, it does not account for the word lecha. To you, to yourself. But if we follow then the translation more literal from the Hebrew, then it is actually saying, do not become to yourself another Elohim. You see how the root of idolatry is actually self? When they worshiped these gods, they were doing it for themselves. It was a mutually manipulative relationship that they had with these gods. These are demons abusing them, and them thinking they can get something out of it for themselves. It was all about themselves. talking about us, right? Because we may not have these molten images and all these things that they use for worship. We go to these archaeological sites and we see that this is like art. It looks great. It means nothing to us. We're not tempted to bow down there. Maybe some people would, but because we have our own idols. But guess what? The essence of it is the same. Because whatever idols we worship, whether it is money, power, appearance, it really is about ourselves. It's about me. I do it to get something for myself out of it. So the essence remains the same, and the Lord knew it. That's why the commandment says, do not become to yourself another Elohim, another God. And at the end, it uses the word al-panaya. We get the word, it comes from the word panav, which is all over the place. If you remember the blessing that we just sang, it's all about the Lord's face, the Lord's countenance. That's the word panav. His face shine upon you. That's the word being used here. And I love that word because at Sukkot here, our aim is to have an encounter with the Lord in the manifest presence of God. How do you say presence in Hebrew? You say panav. To be face to face. That's the presence of God. To have an encounter with his face. To be face to face with him. For him to reveal his face. Remember, he told Moses, I can't show you my face. I'm going to show you my back. That's all you can handle, buddy. If it was me, he will say, I'm going to show you my little toe. That's all you can handle, Joey. I don't want you to die today. So this concept then of of the face, of the presence of God, that's part of this, because he's saying, do not become another Elohim, and he uses the word al, and the word al can be against. It can be contrary, depending on the context. So the way I'm translating this is, do not become to yourself another Elohim in opposition to me, against me, against my face, against my presence. Not only have another God beside me. When you bring another God, you're doing it in front of my face. You're doing it in opposition to me, contrary to me. Do not do that. Now we have not only an illustration of what this commandment means, but a deeper understanding of what it actually implies, what it actually says. So I want us to move into Psalm 19, but before we do that, I need to explain something to you first so you understand what we find in Psalm 119. And I'll give you an example. Psalm 119, verse 36 says, incline my heart to your testimonies and do not, and not to dishonest gain. Incline my heart not to dishonest gain or cheating in business, but incline my heart to your testimonies. And so we feel like, okay, God's testimonies are, what he's done, right? His acts and his fame and his glory, the things that he's done for Israel. And that's true, but that's not what this is. You see, the Hebrew word for testimonies here is edut. So I want us to follow and see what edut actually is. Okay? So we're going to back up a little bit. So we're going to go to Exodus 31:18. Exodus 31:18. And we read there about Moses when God speaking to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him upon Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the edut. Oh, you getting the picture? The tablets of the testimony. It says the tablets of stone, written by the finger of God. These are the 10 commandments. The testimonies are the 10 commandments. Who knew? It's right there in the hidden under the translation, right? One more, Exodus 38:21. It says, this is the number of things for the tabernacle of the testimony. What is the testimony? The 10 commandments. So God is calling the tabernacle, saying this is the tabernacle of the 10 commandments, of the testimony. Now that changes the perspective. This is the tabernacle characterized by the 10 commandments, known by. One more, Exodus 40:20. Verse 20, it says, then he took the testimony. What is the testimony? The tablets of the 10 commandments. He took the testimony and put it into the ark and attached the poles to the ark and put the mercy seat on top of the ark. So what ark are we talking about? The Ark of the Covenant, where the mercy seat goes, where they would pour the blood for the Day of Atonement in the Holy of Holies. So again, verse 20 says, then he took the testimony, the tablets of the 10 commandments, and put it into the ark. That's where it went. So what are you going to call this ark? The Ark of the Testimony. Isn't that what we call it? Right? Verse 21. He brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up a veil in front of for the screen, and screened off the ark of the testimony, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The testimonies then refers very clearly, without a doubt, to the 10 commandments. Now we can read Psalm 119. Right? And really understand it. So, Psalm 119. Let's read verse 14 first. Verse 14. It says, I have rejoiced in the way of your 10 commandments. I have rejoiced in the way. The 10 commandments are a path of life in which we walk. And he says, I have rejoiced. There is a difference between joy and rejoice. Rejoice is an outburst, what we had today during worship. It's an outburst of joy. Now, we can be a joyful person, and hopefully we are, right? When we go, especially when we go to the line and trying to get food, and I see that y'all are getting the chicken, and I can see it's not going to be enough for me. I better keep my joy. But that's different than rejoicing. It is a moment thing where I have a burst of joy. Well, I think David is recalling a moment in which a realization from the truths of the Ten Commandments caused him to rejoice in the Lord. One of the commandments is to keep the Sabbath day. Keep the Sabbath day, right? And for so many, I believe for all of us, there has been a revelation. Maybe it is for the first time for some of you to come to know what the Sabbath really was. And then for others to come to understand more in depth what the Sabbath really is. And that can be a moment of rejoicing over understanding one of the commandments. And you know, I was thinking actually when we were singing the blessing, the Lord keep you. And what came to my mind is, do I want him to keep me the way I keep his Shabbat? No. Because the way I keep his Shabbat is so minimal that I would say, no, please, don't treat me the way I treat you. So I want to be more careful with his commandments. Not to earn anything, but just because I love him. I don't want his heart to feel like, okay, I love you in spite of you. I love you. I really do. I really do. Nah, I'm so thankful he's much more mature than me. He is emotionally complete. He lacks nothing. He does not need for me to observe anything to love me. But he invites me to enter into his experience, his rest, because he wants to share with me. Anyway, so I have rejoiced in the way of your 10 commandments as much as in all riches. 1:19:31. I cling to your 10 commandments. Now, this is the word we talked about last week. Because last week we were talking about cling to the Lord in order to avoid this whole context of departing, of committing apostasy against the Lord, right? The solution is to cling. Same word used for a husband, cling to your wife, Genesis. So here I cling. I have an emotional relationship with the 10 commandments, like I have it with my wife. Now, I wish that was true of my life. I want it to be true. It's not to the point where it should be. But isn't this a great goal? I want to cling to the 10 commandments in an emotional way, similar to the way I cling to my wife. Verse 36. Incline my heart to your 10 commandments. You see, I need that. In order for me to cling, I need for him to first incline my heart. I need you to draw me near, Lord, to your 10 commandments. Are you beginning to see the ministry of the 10 commandments? That's what we're talking about here. The ministry of the 10 commandments, what they do. And let me tell you this. The reason is because the 10 commandments are not the 10 rules. There's another name for the 10 commandments. They're called the 10 words. When you receive a word from the Lord, isn't that a promise? A promise of what He is going to do with you, through you, in you. It's a promise of the future that He wants to create. There's a word. I got a word from the Lord, and I cling to this word. Guess what? The 10 commandments are the 10 words. They're not the 10 rules. They're the 10 words. They're the 10 promises. You see, when God blessed Adam and Eve in the garden, He said, be fruitful and multiply. And some people call that the first commandment of the Bible. That's not a commandment. That's a blessing. It says He blessed them. When you bless someone, you are pronouncing over them what's going to happen to them. So when God blessed Abraham, it wasn't a command. It was a prophecy. It was a prophetic word over him. The 10 commandments are prophetic words of what God is going to do in you and in me. So I don't need to run around guarding against idolatry, for instance. I need to cling to His word for me. Because His word, His first word out of the 10 says, you will not become a god to yourself against me. You will not become a god. Rather than you should not, and then the whole weight is on me, it is you will not. I will bless you. I will be with you. I will protect your heart. I will guide you. I will steer you away. So what I need to do, my part is I need to dwell on His word, on His prophetic word. I need to fight from my word. I have a promise that the Lord is going to do such a work in my heart that I'm going to be able to walk with Him and not struggle against my tendency to be so self-focused. Because that's what idolatry is. That is the ministry of the 10 Commandments. We're running out of time, so I got some verses here that I'm going to owe you. But look at the word testimony in Psalm 119. You're going to find 9 occurrences, 9 of these words, 9 thoughts in Psalm 119 about the testimonies, about the 10 Commandments. Amen. Amen. Within the context of this series that we're doing, how to avoid the coming destruction that we see over our nation, over our Western civilization. This is one of them. How not to be a god to myself. How not to become a god to myself. His word is a promise to me that He will work in my life in such a way to cause that to happen and to become a reality in my life. Let's pray.